listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm here with my disembodied co-host, Bob Schlehuber. Let's prepare to go against the grain. We're still hunkered down at our respective residences, but we have still put together a scorcher of a show for you today. Yesterday was mini Super Tuesday, with several states braving infection and potential death to cast a worthless vote for one Joe Biden. We'll be diving to the election results, specifically Florida, in addition to the infinitely foreseeable difficulties that were to be expected running an election during a viral pandemic. A little later in the hour, we'll discuss COVID-19 responses by our political leaders, including a surprising position of several Republicans, including the Trump administration, that blows past the Democrats' response. And I'd go so far to say that if Trump accomplishes this, he will be a lock for the presidential election. In the next hour, we'll be diving back into the Democratic primary with the election in Arizona. Now, Sanders was hoping that his chances in Arizona, as his strength with the Hispanic population, he thought that would make it a more favorable location than many of the other states, such as Ohio or Florida. He still lost, and he lost, unfortunately, by significant margins. We will be discussing what went wrong. Also, be sure to stay for our weekly mystery segment. We'll be discussing something that is out of this world that I know is going to pique your interest. But first, logically, we start at the beginning. Last night, I covered the election as the results were being released. Florida, Illinois, Arizona. A clean sweep for one Joe Biden. All domineering wins. For the third week straight, this little community of ours, the majority of which are Sanders supporters, stood together and suffered. Just a man, vulnerable, broken, ill-tempered, angry. I figure we ride together in celebration. It seems it's only fitting that we do the same in defeat. Week after week, without a moment of respite or bright spot, we were attacked by the Democratic Party and its media minions as Nazis, Russian agents, racists, sexists. The supporters of color and women were erased as bros. The policy proposals that would materially benefit the life, my life, your life, the life of your family and community, they were attacked by the establishment of the party. This is in spite of those policy proposals as being popular. To put it in perspective, every state that has voted, even in states that Sanders lost by like 30 points, all of them, a large majorities, were for Medicare for all. That still didn't stop Joe Biden, the front runner, the representative of the establishment, from relentlessly attacking the plan, going so far as to say that if it was passed by a House and by a Senate, that he would still veto it. Talk about no respect. Now, however, they realize that Joe Biden is probably going to win this thing. And now all of the slander, all of the attacks, all of the assaults, all of the attacking of the lefties, now they realize they need those lefties. And so last night, Joe Biden called for unity as he tried to woo Bernie voters. Let's hear the clip.
Sanders and his supporters have brought a remarkable passion and tenacity to all of these issues. Together, they have shifted the fundamental conversation in this country. So let me say, especially to the young voters who have been inspired by Senator Sanders, I hear you. I know what's at stake. I know what we have to do. Our goal as a campaign, and my goal as a candidate for president, is to unify this party and then to unify the nation.
Yeah, I don't believe in last-minute evolutions. I've never believed in last-minute evolutions. I've said that more than once. I believe that when people tell me what they are, I believe them. If you spent a lifetime of trying to cut Social Security, if you spent a lifetime trying to cut Medicare, if you spent a lifetime putting people in prison, especially people who look like me. If you spend a lifetime lying about being a part of the civil rights movement, or lying about working in South Africa, or lying about your Iraq war vote, then I'm not going to like you very much, especially if you're going to make the argument that nothing is going to fundamentally change. And by the way, regardless of all of this unity talk, when queried, what will you do in order to get those people who are backing Sanders, Joe Biden had nothing. You don't believe me? Listen to Sanders. Sanders is shocked that Democrats still ignore the wishes of the young voters, voters that they are going to need. Let's hear Sanders.
Really does stun me to what degree the Democratic establishment continues to ignore the needs and the ideas of younger people. And if elected president, by the way, it's not only that we're going to fight for our agenda, we're going to involve young people in the decision-making process in a way this country has never seen before, because this is a great generation. So those are major achievements. We've changed the political dialogue in this country. We are winning overwhelmingly the support of young people.
Unfortunately, those young people aren't going to the polls in numbers that are necessary for Sanders to win. And as he just said, he is shocked that the Democratic Party ignores that part of the demographic. Here's the catch. It's not that they ignore them. Actually, they do ignore them. But they can ignore them because the plan of gaslighting, or the plan that you have nowhere else to go. To put it in perspective, think of what has taken place over the last 40, 50 years with the left still backing the Democratic Party. You have Glass-Steagall being destroyed by Bill Clinton. You have the privatization, or the attempted privatization, of Social Security. That's mind-blowing in and of itself. You have the explosion of the prison population, the destruction of welfare. You have a situation where the next Democratic president gives 95% of the income gains to the top 1%. You have that same Democratic president, drone bomb king, deporter-in-chief. You have a situation where he throws his body to protect the banker, saying, I'm the guy between you and the pitchforks, while letting homeowners go bust. This is the Democratic Party. This is the same president that enshrined 80% of Bush tax cuts into law. This is the Democratic Party. The last person who was running in the race that was a Democrat brazenly cheated you and your team. And even when Sanders went out to back that person, when queried, meaning Hillary Clinton, in this race, will you back Sanders? Her response initially was, effectively, no. No. She felt perfectly okay with going that route. She took perfectly okay with taking that cadence. My point that I'm making to you is the reason that you're ignored, because all incentives go towards ignoring you. You, for the most part, have given your vote over. You have agreed with this perspective that you have nowhere else to go. And the moment that you agree with that perspective, why do they have to listen to you at all? If you're willing to give your vote for nothing in return, why are they willing to listen to you at all? And that's really what it boils down to. The question needs to be asked right now what? What's to be done? It looks like Sanders has lost. And while Sanders has been able to move this bit of movement forward and to go years, I mean, in 2008, nobody would ever have believed in 2008 that the conversation is what the conversation is currently. Right now, this notion of expanding Social Security, paying off student debt, these things weren't even on the agenda in 2008. So while I have a certain degree of anger right now, I do fully and entirely understand that Sanders, in many respects, put this movement on his back and took it to where it is, even though he couldn't necessarily get over the finish line. The question becomes, now what? Where do Sanders people go? Where does this political revolution go? What comes next? And the thing that I would point to, the thing that I would push, is that it is time to come to the conclusion that the Democratic Party is not a home for you. It is not representing your interests. It doesn't back your policy ideas. It slanders and smears and attacks you relentlessly for pushing for your own policy ideas. Policy, by the way, that if you go from state to state to state, even when Sanders loses those states, the policies are still popular. Meaning the Democratic Party itself has always made this argument that what the left wanted wasn't popular. Well, that's not true. It made the argument that the way you run the race, you have to take massive amounts of money and work around the edges. Well, that also ended up not being true. My point here is that if you have ideas that you want to get accomplished, meaning policy ideas, you have to start at this premise of saying, I'm willing to leave. It is time for lefties to realize that what they want to get accomplished within the context of the Democratic Party won't happen. You tried in 2016, you tried to board the ship in 2020, and the entire apparatus of the party itself lined up against not just your candidate, but against you individually. You had media networks, CNN, MSNBC, outright slandering us. These networks were only working at the behest of the Democratic Party for their oligarchs and for their political interests. This is kind of the point that I'm making here. If you're willing to back the Democratic Party after the level it has attacked you and smeared you and pushed back against the things that you wanted as policy and interests, and then when you ask the very basic question, what are you willing to do to get their supporters? And the answer comes back, nothing. We're going to send Bernie out there to shuck and jive and get his people to vote for us. I am making the point to you that it is time to come to Jesus. It's time to leave. It is time to bail. It is time to create something that is fundamentally different and stop giving support to a party that does not have your interests at heart, will not have your interests at heart, and will continue to disrespect you and mistreat you for as long as you incentivize your own mistreatment and your own disrespect. What's to be done is to leave, is to call it a day, and to find some way of political organization outside of the Democratic Party. Because at this point, I think it becomes clear that they are not backing your interests. Stop backing theirs. Bob, I don't say this lightly, but it's pretty telling that even Sanders, who's going to go out there and shuck and jive to try to get people to vote for Joe Biden or whatever random Democrat they put up, even Sanders is noticing, hey, they don't seem to be paying attention to the interests of the youth. They don't care about what my voters want at all. And that's the catch. They don't. They don't because you didn't try to get anything. They don't because any notion of political accountability has been out the window for the last 40, 50 years. They don't because the left always turns around and just votes for whatever random Democrat gets put up. Do I have a point, Bob, or am I off the rails here?
I think, yes, we didn't know each other about 3 years ago, Jamal, but I think you're echoing a lot of what I was yelling about several years ago and why I didn't vote for Democrats in 2016 and why, again, here in Washington, D.C., I don't work with these people. Regardless of what Bernie Sanders is, somebody, I lean towards the same policies that he has. And I think ultimately what he's really facing right now is that culture you need to win across 50 states in the United States. And a lot of people like myself and a lot of the people I organize with, or at least in parallel with, ideologically, we're all on the same page. Get rid of student debt, readdress capitalism, rethink how we think of policing to our public safety approach. But at the end of the day, over the last years, I haven't seen our revolution endorse candidates or revolution that are part of Bernie Sanders at that kind of grassroots fight. I think they're doing a lot of the kind of the building out of what a party would look like. You need a lot of education. You need a lot of intellectual muster behind any movement. And they definitely have that, I think. But I think ultimately what Sanders is seeing is that it's really, really hard to motivate young people to turn out when young people haven't been engaged basically ever in the political process. As much as older generations talk about, oh, we're going to do this for you, we're going to do that for you, it's about younger generations. Well, young people haven't been brought into the fold now. And this is a very characteristic thing of so many electoral movements. And ultimately, it's social movements where you really see the thrust of young people. It's not within political movements, at least not for Bernie Sanders in 2020. I think that's what he's really kind of faced. I think he went the right route. He said, look, if I'm going to win and we're going to change things, I need these young people. And these young people were not responding, whether it was on them, whether it's on Sanders. I think we still need to kind of figure that out a little bit to figure out where do we go next. I think he took the right gamble for him to eventually try to win the nomination. And it simply just wasn't there for him. And I see we're seeing a lot of that kind of collapse on top of the pressure from the Democratic Party itself, Jamal. And I think that's really where we need to start assessing that if we want to move forward, people do need to either turn to other organizing structures, or as people we've seen here now the last week or so, as people desperately need to organize with one another, they have to just turn to their neighbors and say, party aside, we need to start as communities, start organizing our own efforts. And I think that's what's really interesting too, is that maybe the fix isn't within another political party, but people simply just start organizing social movements, another economic movement. I think we're desperately going to need, and we will see out of this COVID-19 slowdown, that maybe the electoral sphere is simply just not where things go, and people should just avoid it altogether. I'm almost on that thing. Don't worry about finding another party. Just find other organizations and institutions that can help you win socially and economically, and let the politics continue just to be this corrupt place where things go to die. That's my rant there, Jamal. We got a whole another hour and 45 minutes there for our listeners. 202-521-1320. We're excited. We have guests from Florida up next, and we also have additional guests from Arizona talking about the latest results. You're listening to Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. on Radio Sputnik. We're back after this.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Tune in every Wednesday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker and John Kiriakou for a regular segment called Beyond Nuclear, where Brian and John discuss nuclear issues, including weapons, energy, waste, and the future of nuclear technology in the United States, with Kevin Camps, the radioactive waste watchdog at the organization Beyond Nuclear. Listen on Wednesdays right here on Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits, the show that goes against the grain. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm here with my disembodied co-host, Bob Schlakehuber. We have a lot to discuss this hour, but logically, we have to start at the primary. I mean, otherwise, how would you know what took place? So yesterday, we had primaries in Florida, Arizona, and Illinois. Ohio was scheduled to be held yesterday, but was postponed at the last minute over health concerns pertaining to what is it called? That's right, the COVID-19 pandemic. So to say that this did not go off without a hitch is an understatement. Unannounced polling closures, you had lack of sanitation and supplies at some of the facilities, you had workers and volunteers who were concerned about their health that just didn't show up. But problems aside, Joe Biden had another dominant night sweeping all of the states. So to discuss, we're joined with political consultant and political organizer and co-founder of the Black Lives Matter Tampa, Donna Davis. Donna, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I am well, thank you. You guys you're really cooking so far. I've been listening.
Yeah, we're trying. All of us are kind of in our own enclaves. We're social distancing, so we're trying to do the show remote, but we're still doing the news, so I can't necessarily complain. Thank you for joining us.
Sure.
So, by all accounts, Joe Biden had a dominant night last night. In Arizona, he pulled 43.4% to Sanders' 31.5%. In Florida, he pulled 61.9% to Sanders' 22.8%. In Illinois, he pulled 59.4% to Sanders' 35.7%. He is going to get a huge number of delegates. Let me ask you this. I have to be honest, each week, especially over the last few weeks, you could see what was taking place in regards to the polling. And it felt like somebody was going to punch you in the face, but you couldn't move out the way of the punch. You just had to stand there and take it. That's kind of how each of these weeks have felt. What was it on the ground that allowed Sanders to do so poorly in Florida? Was there something that was going on that was just adverse for him and the way that he was running that particular race? Or is it just some kind of environmental issue dealing with Florida that they don't particularly like Sanders all that much? What was it in Florida that made it so hard or so difficult for Sanders to do well there?
I mean, I never, I've been out and about traveling for the last 7 months on the presidential primary campaign trail. So I wasn't on the ground in Florida until about a week and a half ago when I left South Carolina. I don't think that I never felt the impact of a Sanders operation in Florida. I never got any direct mail from the Sanders campaign. I'm a super voter. And so I was expecting, I did receive pieces from Biden. I never received anything from Sanders. There was a lot of hemming and hawing in social media. Sanders supporters were angry as he began to slip and lose his early leads. They started to attack Biden supporters. Now, I voted for Bernie Sanders, even though I realized that Biden was going to win Florida. I went to sleep last night, and when I woke up, there was a map. And on this map, it showed in purple all of the counties that Biden won in Florida, every single county. There was no county. There was nothing. So
Wow.
We can talk through what some of the conversations have been, what some of the surrogates in Florida have been saying about Sanders going into this. But and the thing about it is 70% of the people who voted in Florida yesterday were there were 45 and older, okay? And so the young voters, there continues to be a conversation about whether or not young voters are voting. And the risk was for people who were above a certain age with coronavirus. And so that should have been a different group of primary voters, but those folks just didn't show up. Hillsborough and Pinellas combined has 1.25 million people in the Pinellas and Hillsborough counties. About 50,000 people voted for Bernie in those counties.
Wow. That is brutal. So what were the surrogates saying on the ground? You said that basically Sanders lost all of those areas. And as a Sanders supporter, people were getting upset, right? I mean, it was a few things. It wasn't just losing the lead. It was frustration with the candidate himself, not necessarily being able to go after his opponent. It was frustration with the media in the sense that the way, especially like MSNBC or CNN, in the way that they would talk about his supporters as if they were somehow unique or different than the other people in the race. So the frustrations were significant. And I don't hit voters. I don't believe in going after people's voters. People vote for all sorts of reasons. It doesn't necessarily make sense. I didn't think it was a good idea to go after Trump supporters because they voted for Trump. They have all sorts of reasons for doing so. So I don't necessarily think that for Biden either. By the same token, there had to have been something that just wasn't connecting regarding Sanders. Is this just the elderly thing? I mean, Florida has a large elderly population, and the elderly were going for Joe Biden in spades, or is there something else? What were the surrogates saying on the ground?
The surrogates were simply saying that in order to move our country forward, we have to cast a vote for Sanders. A vote for Sanders is a vote for a different economic paradigm, and that was time. We're in late stage capitalism. It's time for a paradigm shift. So what I found out when I was working on a campaign in St. Louis, Missouri in 2014, I learned that in times of economic uncertainty, people will focus solely on the economy. Elections will be won and lost on economic issues alone. In times of economic certainty, people pivot to social issues. They say, oh, there's sex trafficking. We have to make the hotels report and go into the rooms every day. If we are in a time of economic uncertainty, and if that canon is going to hold true in this construct, in this paradigm, what that means is people are voting the economy right now. If you look at the stock market, I lost a quarter of my investments in the stock market over the last 2.5 weeks. I'm not worried about it. I realize that what's weighing on the stock market right now are external factors and not internal factors, and so I'm buying instead of selling. And that's going to look wonderful in August. If people are betting that any changes, any massive changes in business as usual is going to produce negative outcomes, then they're going to vote for Joe Biden because Bernie Sanders remains a question mark. Now, those folks who need health care, those folks who need relief for their student loans, they are irate right now. But people have got to vote. The older people who are looking at their investments, they're looking at their IRAs, and they're saying, we can't have any seismic upheavals in our economic picture, and they're going to vote close to home, right? Joe is the devil they know. Bernie is the one who doesn't. And then on top of that, and keep in mind, as I build this narrative, keep in mind that I'm a Bernie voter. And so what was happening is people were coming to me and saying, what is wrong with Bernie's people? Why are they so wild? Why are they being so angry? They're enraged. They're just telling us you've got to vote for Bernie. And it pushed a lot of the conversation among people who went to Biden after all of the other folks dropped out was that Bernie supporters, there's something wrong with them, and there must be something wrong with Bernie too. Right? This is demagoguery.
But keep in mind, I mean, a lot of this, there's no distinction between Sanders voters and anybody else. I mean, a lot of this was propaganda that MSNBC, CNN, and the other candidates were putting out in order to try to hit Sanders in the knees because one of his strengths just so happened was the energy of his base. It's somewhat disheartening if that's true. Meaning if people were coming out and saying, hey, wow, Sanders supporters are somehow atypical or different than the other supporters, then that means that those people effectively fell for something that wasn't legit. That's so sad if that's true.
Well, I want to just ask Donna. Donna, I'm really interested. Was there a way in which, though, Sanders could have better explained what he meant by democratic socialism or socialism? I thought so much of the candidate's job and what I think a lot of people like Sanders about was this idea of something new and something different, but that needs to be articulated to people. And we saw yesterday, because of basically kind of, you said the devil we know, people aren't looking for, I don't know what people are looking for, but seemingly there was a mismatch between what Sanders was offering and being able to educate enough people on that. And I think that's where we saw a lot of disconnect with the grassroots, with those people like yourself that are doing the political education on a day-to-day and basically saying, look, this is where people are. They're not at a point where they can hear you give a speech on television about socialism and all of a sudden overnight they're going to be like, oh, that does make sense. And it seemed like there was a disconnect between his campaign and then those who would actually educate people and reach the people that needed to better understand these things. Because there's something that happened there that I think was also missing.
Yeah, thank you for bringing me back to that, so I won't wander in the wilderness. I mean, that was a political issue. One of the things that we try to teach young political organizers is you need to figure out where people are. And from that point, you can figure out, going in, your plan, this is where we need a win number. Your goal as an organizer is to call that win number out of the population. You can't change what education voters have. You can't change the outcomes unless you change the amount of information that your voters have. And so we were telling the Sanders organizers, yes, you need these people. You have to persuade them. That's the whole idea of having a conversation on the doors, is persuasion, right? We figure out if people are supporting us. We figure out if people know who our candidate is. We persuade them based on the ideas and the quality of our candidate's platform. There was a belief that was just an ambient belief that these are good ideas. They should be universally accepted, and they should be universally voted upon by anyone with a brain. This was the conversation. On the other hand, the work to educate people about democratic socialism, about what it is and what it is not, what it would do to the economy, what it would not do to the economy, that work was not done. That's the vacuum. That's the hole. In Florida, we have 13 million voters. In 2016, we had 12.3 million voters. In 2014, 11.8 million voters. This is a huge electorate. And yesterday, only 2 million voted. So
Wow, that was all that came out to vote in Florida yesterday, just 2 million?
yeah, and so it's not going to cut it, right? And so that tells you the answer to your question, Bob. People don't have enough information. They're not motivated. They don't understand this hope. There's no way that we make it in November for either of our candidates at this level of voting.
Wow. This is 105.5 Sputnik Radio. My name is Jamal Thomas. We are here, excuse me, I'm sorry. We are here talking about the election, especially effectively Sanders and you could say lack of performance in Florida. We have with us co-founder of Black Lives Matter in Tampa, Donna Davis, to discuss this with us. So is there anything he could have done differently besides the education thing, Donna? Or it was just always a difficult terrain for him to function in?
Well, I mean, what we should do in order to answer that question intelligently is to superimpose 2020 over 2016. In 2016, Bernie seemed to light a fire in America. At that moment, people were saying, this is the new thing that we've wanted. We don't expect the DNC, which kind of turned into a bit of a cabal in the last 20 years. We don't expect the DNC to co-sign someone who brands himself as a democratic socialist and is an independent. We don't expect the DNC to co-sign that, no matter how needful the things that he's bringing forth are. And so Bernie was the underdog. He became America's sweetheart. He was our Jewish grandfather. People saw him with eyes of love and as someone who was wronged by the DNC. For some reason, and I'm not sure about the psychology that drove this, on the backdrop of Trump's America, Bernie was somehow painted as an interloper, an usurper of the public good this go around, right? And I think some of the anger and the frustration and the alienation that Bernie supporters felt was, if there was ever a time for these ideas, it's right now. And they seem to be roundly rejected. I think we're going to be unpacking the psychological implications and the way people were thinking, the sociological implications of people embracing a candidate and rooting for him and having him win in places in 2016 that he did not win in 2019. I think some of that had to do, it may have been misogyny towards Hillary Clinton and the fact that she became wildly unpopular during that time period compared to previous years. But I think that there's some implications around human behavior and bandwagons and groupthink and the panic that an unstable economy can create in the electorate, and how people will change how they act based on what they're experiencing and the pressures on them. So it would seem that people would vote for a candidate that was unveiling programs that would alleviate economic pain, and reject a candidate that was saying we're going to go back and do things the way they were. It just doesn't make sense. I can't figure it out.
Well, I mean,
yeah, Donna,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Bob.
Go ahead, Jamal. I wanted to pivot a little bit towards the general come November and what that means for Donald Trump's race there to win Florida. So go ahead, Jamal, if you want to talk more about what exactly happened yesterday.
Well, I was going to go there myself. I was going to ask, because of the way that the Democratic Party, like you said, lined up against effectively all of those ideas. I mean, and ideas were popular. That's the wild part, right? When you go from state to state to state, even in state Sanders lost, by a large majority, the people were for Medicare for all. If you ask them about Social Security, they were for that. If you ask them about school. And so it's this kind of, what does that mean, though, in the election coming up? Because I have to be honest, I'm not voting for Joe Biden. And many of the people who I know have been pretty hardened against this notion of backing Biden in this election, even more so than I've seen going back to 2016. So how does Biden win this race when the party had effectively lined up, smeared, slandered, and attacked all of these lefties that they're going to need for him to win.
Well, let me just to pivot, to piggyback on that then, Donna, is I did talk to the former gubernatorial nominee for the Democratic Party, Andrew Gillum, when I was there in Florida. The super friend, Andrew Gillum, to the rescue of any of his friends at the end of a long night there in Florida. Shout out to him for coming to the rescue. But talking to him, he said back at the first debate was basically saying, look, we are candidate agnostic in the Democratic Party. We win if we turn out and register people. And I'm with Jamaro there saying, how are you going to turn out people if you don't have a coherent message on climate change, on healthcare, on student debt? But Democrats like Andrew Gillum, who obviously have a voice within the party, have simply said it's all about turnout and registration. I just don't get how you drag people to the polls if they're not there to turn out for anything but beating Donald Trump. But this goes to your point. If Hillary Clinton was as hated as she was, and it just surprises all of us that maybe anybody but Clinton can easily beat Donald Trump, I really think that's the best hope for the Democratic Party, is that we just undervalued how much people really went in 2016 to vote for Trump just because they didn't like Clinton, and that anybody but Clinton will be able to beat Trump is pretty much their strategy. So candidate agnostic, Donna, or do the issues still matter?
I think that, one, the first question, Jamal, we don't win in November. I think the writing is on the wall there. But Jamal, I'm going to say this, and you probably won't like it, but we weren't going to win with Sanders either. Both of these candidates have failed to give us and a cohesive message, both candidates. The second question is, last year they asked me when I was on the road, I left here in July. I was on the radio, on my radio show here in October, and they said, Donna, what are you hearing out there? What are people saying? What are people making their decisions on? And I said, it's reflexive, it's visceral. People are making their decisions based on how a candidate makes them feel. And that's still true. There are two things, what's happening in their pockets and what's happening between their ears, how people feel. We're in a celebrity culture. We're sitting right in the middle of a culture that values people based on their popularity or how well they entertain us. Some of that is clearly present here. And I think that the Bernie folks, Bernie or bust people, I think the number is 35% of Bernie's people will not vote for Joe Biden. And I think we're going to run our bicycle off the road. And the damage that will be done, and I know Bernie people are going to say, I'm not threatened by that. But the damage that will be done is going to happen to the younger generations, right? So people under 35, people under 40 are going to really take the brunt of the damage that another 4 years of Trump with nothing to lose will do to this country, will impact it for generations.
It's not that I disagree with you. I agree with you on that, and I don't take that lightly at all. I mean, because Trump is going to go after Social Security, he is going to go after Medicare. He's already said that in advance. But there's this kind of philosophical issue of how do you ever get your policy priorities passed or even attended to if you're always going to be willing to go for the random Democrat without any notion of accountability in the process. Like, it just seems like it puts you in a position where you're always relegated to not getting what you want accomplished in the political space because you're always willing to acquiesce to this you have nowhere else to go argument.
Okay, so here's what I would say. I would say when the Republicans decided that they wanted to take over this country and, merge church and state and all of the wild things that they're doing right now, that plan started when I was 25 years ago. 25 years ago. They had a 20-year plan. We decided that we were going to have a third party, a real viable third option that wasn't a Democrat 8 years ago, right? 10 years ago. And so when we decided that, when that decision was made, people said, you know what, we really should do this. And we got Bernie Sanders to become the champion in the face of that. There was no accompanying plan or platform. We've made it up as we've gone. And so the result is we have this cacophony of voices saying this is how we ought to do it. There's Liz Warren, and she's talking over Bernie. Bernie's talking over her. Now we've got two progressives. She basically lifted Bernie's platform and said, I can do it better. I can articulate it. Well, that didn't work. It split the vote, and it hurt Bernie early on. And so there's no agreement, usually there isn't, on the left of how we execute a plan. So in the absence of a plan, in the absence of this constituency being able to designate their chosen spokesperson and candidate, chaos has ensued. And so, yes, we need this, but we have to also have more than a movement. When you take a movement and you make it political, you have to now develop a field plan. You have to develop a political plan. You have to develop a message. None of these things happen. People were just like, we need this, we need it, so let's do it. And that's not how politics works.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair. I can appreciate that. I mean, so one thing I disagree with. Well, let's go to this part for a moment. Florida. So in Al Gore, when Gore v. Bush, we had a situation in Florida where I think it was like hundreds of thousands of African Americans were disenfranchised from the vote. And you had people who were extremely angry, kind of making this argument that we were disenfranchised. Now, they went to Congress over this, and they were trying to get a random Democrat senator to back up their proposal, meaning they wanted to contest the results, and they couldn't find any Democrat, not one, in the Senate in order to contest the results. And Al Gore himself refused to even push and fight for what seemed like an election that was basically stolen. Has Florida changed in regards to their tenor towards voters? Now, I know at one point they had a referendum where they were supposed to ensure that all of those people who served their time was getting their voting rights back. Have they pushed that through yet? Have they been able to get those voting rights back, or has there been some kind of wrinkle in this that has prevented them from going through with the referendum result?
No, they haven't. They keep, they keep messing with it. They went back this last time, and the problem that we had early on was a Republican introduced the notion that if a person had not paid their restitution, they would not be considered to have completed their sentence, and as such would not be eligible to have their voting and other rights restored. And that's been run up the line up to the Florida Supreme Court, and it's in a stalemate where, the Republicans successfully argued that if a person has not paid off their funds, that they would not be able to vote. And so there's a small number of people who are having their rights restored, but we all know that part of the prison industrial complex is to take as many people and relegate them to being low-wage earners on the margins of society as possible. That's the whole purpose of putting people through the system, right? Is to create slave labor. So they're not really, the state of Florida, having its roots and its wealth rooted in slavery, its early years, is not interested in people who are on the margins, and is really content to leave those folks behind. And they're proud of it. They're not ashamed of what we look like in the 21st century, marginalizing people and relegating them to essentially the shadows. So that's going to be another fight. I think that we have to change the constitution of the Florida State House. It's problematic. We have people calling women host bodies. It's very retro. But we've been gerrymandered to hell, and so it's very difficult to make our legislative bodies, it's a problem we have everywhere, right, reflect the will of the people. And so 60% of Floridians voted and said, yes, we want people who have served their sentences to have their rights restored, and yet 200 people in the state capitol are saying we don't want that. We don't agree with that because it doesn't serve their interests, which is not how politics and representation is supposed to work.
That's Donna Davis. She's the co-founder of Black Lives Matter Tampa, a political consultant and political organizer. Yeah, quite wild, Donna. There is all the money these billionaires have spent there, Tom Steyer and Michael Bloomberg. They could have easily covered the debts of all of those returning citizens in the state of Florida looking to get their rights back in this country, but that is not the way of Americans. Donna, thank you again for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great. We are turning to a quick break here. After the break, we will get to you, Simon, Tony, Uncle Brother. We see you on hold on the line. We'll have your calls right after this. You're listening to Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. We're back after this.
This is Dominic Carter, a political reporter in New York for Verizon Fios TV News.
This is Dr. Bill Honigman of Progressive Democrats of America, PDAmerica.org.
Hey everybody, my name is Tim Black of The Tim Black Show.
This is Tom Luongo of Gold Coast and Guns.
Hello, this is Benny Johnson.
Hi, this is Juanita Broderick, author of You'd Better Put Some Ice on That.
This is Jamal Thomas from the Progressive Soapbox.
Hey, this is Raheem from D.C.
This is Rachel Blevins, a correspondent with RT America, and you're listening to Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
When I'm waking up in the morning and I'm looking for what's on the queue for the day, I tune to Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
The wokest radio show for your wokest AM.
These guys are the best in the business and experts when it comes to policy.
They're bringing you the top headlines with an angle that you won't see in the mainstream media.
Fault Lines is the greatest show on the radio. I enjoy immensely talking with Lee and Garland. They always treat me from either side with due respect, and it's a wonderful conversation.
The best morning news show in America. Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
Lee and Garland speak truth to power from the depths of the swamp itself, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm here with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber, and we've been talking about yesterday primary votes. As you know, you can hit us up at 202-521-1320 if you have anything to say that's on your mind. Right now, we have a few calls, so let's get to the calls first. We have Simon. Simon, what's going on?
Yes, man. I saw your little program last night. You were talking about the voting machine problems, the officials notice, and also in North.
Yeah, in Texas. That's right. Yeah, there were multiple votes that weren't being allocated in Texas, and then they also found one of the guys in, I forget the name of the county, but they were calling for a forensic investigation because the vote totals didn't make sense, and the whistleblowers were making a point that they were they said they were whistleblowers saying that the machines were being tampered with. So, that's a major deal considering Texas wasn't a huge difference in regards to total between Sanders and Biden.
Oh man, it's ridiculous. And also, I gotta say this: I haven't been seeing no commercials of Bernie Sanders down here in New Orleans and Louisiana at all. And I want to tell your people, your audience, to look into Colorado Silver and Colorado Copper on YouTube. That's all I wanted to say.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. All right, we have one more call, and we have, let's see, I think this is Uncle Brother. What's going on, Uncle Brother?
My brothers, how are you?
Doing all right, man. You staying safe?
Okay, good. So we're staying coronavirus free, right? Yes.
That's the goal. That's what we're trying to do, yeah.
As a young person, I don't even know at this point, though, right? Isn't that what they're saying, that us young folks who are asymptomatic are the ones spreading it because we're not showing signs of it? So, yes, I hope I'm coronavirus free, but until we have those tests, which is a major concern, Uncle Brother.
Indeed. Well, let me just say this. I started becoming disenchanted with the two-party system many, many years ago. Back in probably in the 90s, and I was living in California at the time, and so I could vote or register NPP, no party preference. So I was able to vote for whoever I felt was best. I wanted to go with Ross Perot at that time, but I allowed myself to be talked out of it. You don't want to waste your vote, go with the winner, And I regretted that deeply and swore that I would never let it happen again. When I came back to the D.C. area here, I went to vote and still hadn't chosen a party preference, and I was given a provisional ballot. And I didn't realize at the time that you had to be registered a particular party to vote in primaries. This was a primary election about which I'm speaking. So I decided then, okay, I still didn't really want to register or go ahead and affiliate with a party. I don't think I did until Barack Obama, and I fell for it, hook, line, and sinker, drank the Kool-Aid, and supported those years. And at this point, I've just come to the conclusion that this whole political process that we have here in this country is just a farce. It's ridiculous. But I don't want to say let's not participate in it, but let's go against the grain a little bit. And even though I think it's obvious that we see who the ruling party, the ruling elites, the people and running things are afraid of, and that's Tulsi Gabbard. Okay, yes, she may be running as a Democrat, but they're scared to death of her. So my thoughts at this point are to write her in. And when the primary comes around eventually to D.C. here, I'm going to just cast my vote for her, and I'm going to come to the general. I'm just going to write her in because it's evident, and I didn't see how they were going to be able to do it this go around, but somehow they've managed to game the system, game the process once again, and make us believe that somehow Joe Biden has gotten all of these votes and has all of this support. I don't see it. I don't think it's legit. They've mastered this process. It's completely. I mean, they got it down pat. There's no way that. We can't really effectively point at any one thing and say, "Yeah, see right there, they cheated." Because it's so many ways that they've been able to, so many tactics that they've used and ways that they've used to gray the whole or blur the whole process. So that's just my suggestion. I think I would highly recommend that anybody who's got a platform start talking about a write-in campaign and just write in either your preferred candidate. If it was Bernie, okay, write in Bernie. If it's Tulsi, write in Tulsi. But like you just said a moment ago, there's no way I'm going to cast my vote for Joe Biden. I didn't cast my vote for Hillary Clinton, and I'm not going to do it this time either. It's just no way.
That's right.
Uncle Brother, thank you so much for the call. Is Donna Davis still on the line with us? Okay. Thank you. So I just wanted to make sure that Donna Davis, in addition to the great political organizing she does extensive mutual aid organizing there in the state of Florida. If you are somebody out there, it is amazing to see all of the people that are able to volunteer right now and get out and about. Jamal Thomas, I'm curious there. You said you're not voting for Joe Biden. Are you with your uncle? Are you going to be writing in Tulsi Gabbard?
I will not be writing in Tulsi Gabbard. If I wrote in anybody, it would be Sanders. But I don't blame him. I mean, how can I blame him? I mean, look, there are some people who are creatures of the party, and their ideology, their morality, and all of that stuff is wrapped within the context of the party, not necessarily something in and of itself. And so they can find themselves taking these kind of relative positions because the party takes a particular position. So when Obama is locking up whistleblowers left and right for waste, fraud, and abuse using the Espionage Act, they have no issue with it. When Trump gets in office, we must protect the noble whistleblower. And at no point do they see any weirdness associated with those two positions. They're creatures of the party. It's not something that digs deep. When you get to a situation where you realize that none of your policy priorities are being attended to, then it becomes this thing of well, why am I supporting this party if it doesn't necessarily represent my interests? And whether that's the Republican Party or whether that's the Democratic Party, you can look at both and say both of these things are effectively two wings of the same bird. And I don't need to be a part of this process. I mean, for God's sake, they slandered and attacked us relentlessly. When what's her name? The woman who was just here. What did she say? She made the point of saying, "Yeah, a lot of people told me that they thought Sanders supporters were crazy or his supporters were insane." Why? When you look at the real research, there's no distinction between Sanders supporters versus any other supporter, with the exception of maybe more of us, especially being younger than maybe online. But that didn't stop them from slandering and attacking the supporters themselves. And then for those supporters, after being attacked so maliciously in such a way, to then turn around and vote for the Democratic Party that attacked you that way. I mean, where is your spine? Where is your sense of self that you would ever be able to be cowed in such a position like that? I don't blame Uncle Brother or anybody else at all that says they're not voting for the Democratic Party or they're not voting for Joe Biden or whoever else the party puts up. I don't blame them. I don't blame them at all.
It is extremely frustrating, and it's also just the bastardization of the word radical, Jamal. Somebody that, for me, is radical is somebody that looks for the simple solution. If somebody doesn't have a home, we find them a home. If they don't have enough food to eat, then we get them food. That, to me, is what it means to be radical in our political space. But yet, radical has been turned into such a bad word. And on the other flip side of things, if we're going to talk about who is actually kind of radical or doing radical things, well, it's Joe Biden's radical for saying he's going to cut Social Security. Joe Biden is radical for saying he's not going to tackle the climate crisis, but simply just sign it into the climate Paris Accord. That's nuts to me. Joe Biden is radical by taking donations from 60 billionaires and saying that that's not going to influence his campaign. Joe Biden's the radical. That to me is radical of how we treat our people in this country and what our politicians get away with. And here's Bernie Sanders in line with the majority of Democrats, supermajority of Democrats, and a majority of Republicans when it comes to college debt forgiveness, public health services, and improvement of government services across the board. That's a majority position, slim majority, with Republicans as well. And he's painted as something like, oh my God, radicalism is bad, as if Joe Biden, the Republican Party, and Republican Party, those aren't the radicals. We have time for just one more call here. Evelyn, thank you for your patience. You got about a minute here so we can get to our next break on time. What is on your mind today?
Okay, so I'll try to get to this quickly. I think progressives need to let the Democratic Party know that progressive values won't die with the defeat of Bernie Sanders. My response to vote blue, no matter who, is only true blue will do, meaning that we are FDR Democrats. We want to expand social programs, Medicare for all. We are the party of the working class, of peace and human rights, and that we will only support candidates who don't take PAC money. Progressives need to let Biden know we know he is Republican-like. He will need to embrace progressive policy if he wants our vote. Saying only true blue will do can remove the commie red connotation people have toward progressives, and this can also pave the way for a new party. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree. That was within the time frame and well articulated. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Jamal.
Yeah, no, I agree with her. I mean, it needs to be, like I said, I took this position in 2016. And when you think about it for the moment, your chances in 2016 would have never happened if Hillary Clinton won that race. It was only the failure that, for the most part, allowed this incongruity or this interregnum where there was this kind of contention for who was going to be in charge or who was going to be in power in the party. So yeah, I agree with her. I think that's the pathway forward.
Well, that is going to do it for our first hour of Political Misfits here in Washington, D.C. And Jamal, yeah, I mean, I think in many ways too, the Democratic Party, I don't necessarily, I'm not holding my breath that the Democratic Party reforms or as if there's good guys and bad guys within that party. I think it needs to completely be either torn apart and rethought. But again, if it's capitalism at the center, as Elizabeth Warren said, Nancy Pelosi said, it's capitalism, capitalism, capitalism. And we're seeing failure of capitalism right now. How or where does the Democratic Party change or adapt in a way that's going to actually even take in those people that are looking for alternative economic systems? I'm not quite sure. Well, we'll take a quick break. We're coming back with more from Arizona. We got some UFOs and the coronavirus national emergency. You're listening to Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. on Radio Sputnik. We're back after this.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here with Jamarl Thomas. Get ready to go against the grain. Well, lots to cover over the next hour, including the latest developments of the COVID-19 national emergency. We will talk some UFOs. Jamarl Thomas on point for that one in our weekly Revelation segment here on Wednesdays at 1:30 p.m. So that's just around the corner. And we'll talk a little bit about what results is coming from the White House in regards to addressing the COVID-19 emergency. Jamarl, hopefully we can get those pilots of those UFOs to maybe start airdropping rescue aid en masse to those Americans, Iranians, Italians, and all those continuing to struggle with the disease worldwide. But now we turn our attention back to yesterday's election results in the state of Arizona. Of the states voting yesterday, it was Arizona that would have the best chance for Sanders to slow the growing momentum of Joe Biden. And sadly for many, that did not happen. He did fare the best out of the states that voted there yesterday, but was well short of victory. Here to talk about the Arizona election is Alejandro Chavez, political director for Smart and Safe Arizona. Alejandro, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Bob, for having me. Appreciate you taking your time out with all this COVID information to really talk about what's going on here in Arizona. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We'll talk obviously a lot about the vote there, but please share with our listeners what's taking place in regards to mutual aid and how people are there building their own networks to distribute medicine and food here over the next weeks. Well, let's start there with the election, though, Alejandro. Maybe tell us a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of the election. A lot coming out of Illinois and just a mess of a process there, just getting voting machines, having to close polling locations, not enough hand sanitizer at locations, quite a bit of chaos. We've also seen obvious problems there in Iowa and in Texas to get proper vote counts and a lot of mismatch reporting of data between when people are actually voting and the exit polls afterwards. Tell us a little bit yesterday what it looked like there in Arizona of just the simple mechanism of voting.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are a mostly vote by mail state. I would say we're probably 70, 75 and moving up in amount of people that return their ballots or amounts that the early ballots count for. Myself, I always turn mine in on election day. I like to walk in the polls. I work in the political forum, so I'm always looking to get the mail and the call to see who's working for my vote. And I walked into my polling location. Now, we did close about a third of them, 70 or 80 of them, because of sanitation needs. They didn't have enough. I walked into my polling location. I dropped my ballot in the little box, got my ticket, said I voted, my vote sticker, and there were other people there. You could see them wiping down when somebody came in. And I will say that while we did have the reduction in polling locations, our Maricopa County recorder, who's in charge of our elections, or supposed to be, his name is Adrian Fontes, ran a fantastic election. We had a higher turnout than we've ever had before, which is fantastic. There were no long lines. People were not reporting problems with places not being open. I can't think of any, and definitely none that were public, and maybe one or two that may have happened that they got resolved quickly. But I can't think of or hear of any that I've heard at scale. We did have some places where
a little bit better. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to just to get into the nitty gritty. I finished your thought there after my question here. I wanted to talk a little bit about the results themselves there. Joe Biden winning there in Maricopa County, where you sit 42% for Biden, 32% for Sanders. And I thought one thing that was kind of interesting about that county, Hillary Clinton got about 58% of the vote there in 2016, Sanders about 38%. So Sanders lost some points from where he did in 2016, but Joe Biden also didn't fare as well as the former Secretary of State did there in 2016. I'm just curious to give us your overall thoughts there on the election results. And as you said, who was working for your vote? Was Bernie Sanders not working hard enough for your vote, or is it simply just come down to the demographic fault lines that we've seen in other states play out?
I think it's a combination of the demographics we've seen. Look, the Sanders campaign did phenomenal work. On his staff, he has 2 or 3 people who are directly from Arizona, right? Really, especially on his Latinx team. So really, even a great work there. And I think you saw Bernie did a great job with Latino vote. I do think that Biden did better than he had done in other states. I think they actually may have even broke even. Last I saw it was like 45, 44 Biden for Latino votes, but that was a little bit earlier before all were counted. So I imagine it's about, they broke even in about Hispanic vote, Latino vote. And I think that's a big difference. In other states, you'd seen Bernie Sanders' team running away with it. In California, you saw him just really putting a big gap between him and Vice President Biden. But I think when you got to Arizona and the math kind of started to work out, and people started to lose their person they wanted. Originally, I was an Elizabeth Warren supporter, a huge Warren supporter, and I was a Castro supporter, and I was a Kamala Harris supporter, and I was a Jay Inslee supporter. So even in my top 4 or 5, and I think as we've seen the polls go, that Arizona, with what we see with immigration, what we saw for decades with Joe Arpaio, had a lot of people just saying, you know what, we need to go with the person we feel can best deliver the election against Trump. And I think that's where you saw this balancing out with the Latino community that you probably hadn't seen in other states.
I guess my concern, though, to maybe push back a little bit, I guess I'm still really concerned about the young vote, and I said that early from the first debate. I was there in Miami and talking to the young people out and about. I was same conversation I had in Detroit talking about young people. They have no interest in Joe Biden. These are people that turned out and either grew up with Barack Obama or voted for Barack Obama and really pulled themselves into his sphere of organizing. And in many ways, so many of those people were disillusioned when it came to police accountability. We saw the movement for Black Lives basically have to fight the Obama administration to have dissent decrees in cities like Baltimore, in Chicago, to address the things happening there in Arizona around racial profiling. It was a push and pressure of the Obama-Biden administration, and then even the immigration policies. And if anybody's been bird dogged in protest the most, I would have to say it's been Joe Biden. At almost every single debate, you've had people talking about the 3 million deportations under his administration. So I really just still continue to struggle of exactly who our electoral system is for and who is going to be able to help those like Joe Biden win the nomination against Donald Trump and not turn them out. And so I guess I'm maybe just to drill down a little bit into the consciousness of those voters in Arizona who did not turn out there yesterday for Joe Biden. Those who voted Sanders, 18 to 44-year-olds, won 65% of the vote to Joe Biden's mere 20%. This is raising alarms to me, or maybe I'm simply wrong in that you think those young people were going to stay home no matter what in November, and that Biden can win with those who turned out yesterday and voted for him.
Yeah. So let's actually just step back a second, right? Like, I think when we talk about Bernie, we have to remember this is not the first time in history we've seen a dynamic person capture the youth vote and not be able to compel it to equal votes. And we're not just talking about on a presidential election. We're talking about on all sorts of levels. As you look at Iron Stash in Wisconsin in 2018. Oh man, young people loved him. He was filling them up like Bernie, and he lost. So I think there's a difference between packing houses and packing up events, and then actually having people get to the polls and vote. And I don't even think it's necessarily there. I think sometimes people like to go to the events. They like to hang out with their friends. I know people who went to the Bernie events are like, I'm voting for Biden, but everybody I know is going and it'll be fun. Bernie's events are fun. Absolutely. But I think when it comes down to it, and we're looking at it, and the policies that people see, the ones they feel are ones that they can most get behind to move forward. Not just support, even though I see Medicare for all, people love it, yeah. But people are voting for Biden. Why is that? Because people like it, but they know it's really hard to pass that we can't get stuck on only that. We have to get what we can get and move forward. I think specifically in Arizona, where we saw Joe for decades, we understand that firsthand more than a lot of people do, because we had someone like Trump for 20 years as a sheriff in Maricopa County.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not to say that you try to get what you can get and you move forward. Let's assume that everybody is on the same team. And one of the things that was made extremely clear in this particular election was that we weren't on the same team. After all, you have Democrats who absolutely attacked not just Sanders, but his supporters, and used his supporters, some of the weakest people in the political space. Those were the people that they decided to attack. The policies were policies that they decided to attack. If all of us were on the same team, that just doesn't happen. How does Joe Biden win this race, seeing as like 80% of the youth vote is going to Sanders? And like Bob made the point and said, those people have no interest in voting for Joe Biden at all.
I get that that's what you feel, but the data shows differently. Yeah, he's not voting, but guess what? He's winning percentage of people that, even though they support Medicare for all, they're still voting for Biden. And when you
that's because electability. I mean, let's be clear. If you're looking at from a policy discussion, people who win, they don't win entirely because of policies. That's like if you and I have a debate, I may win that debate, even though I may be completely wrong in what I'm saying in the debate. People vote for other reasons other than just policy. And in this case, this election boiled down mostly to who do you think is more electable? Who do you think is the person to beat Trump?
Right. And
I mean, that's true. That's not a feeling thing. That's a flat fact thing.
Two things. One is when you say that that they're attacking the most vulnerable. Like, let's remember, Bernie Sanders gets a lot of money from Move On. He gets money from Democracy for America, and their donors, I know because I work for those organizations, are multi-million-dollar donors. So before you say that it's only like because he gets it from other groups first, doesn't mean he's not getting the support of large donor people. Let's just be truthful about
it. Well, I never said anything about donors. I said that they're attacking the most vulnerable. When MSNBC gets on television and a person comes out and said, Bernie Sanders makes my skin crawl, I think he's anti-woman. When another one gets on MSNBC and say, well, I heard that if you're supporting Bernie Sanders as opposed to Warren at this point, you're sexist. Those are attacks that's not leveled at Sanders himself. Those are attacks leveled at the human beings, the people, his supporters and his voters. What am I missing?
Come on, man. There's people out there attacking people too. We're talking about this right now. What we're talking about is the candidates and their policies and how they represent. Let's not get distracted by their supporters and this and that. The fact is, Bernie is not doing enough to bring people in. If he were, he'd be making more head ground than he did in 2016. And 2016 was an anti-Hillary vote. 77,000 people across 4 states stayed home. Nothing else. Let's not kid ourselves. 77,000 people across 4 states. Now, Bernie says he's going to inspire these people, and the numbers just aren't showing that show up. Biden is showing these increases in states. Now, you may say, hey, we're not going to get the young people around, but why would we not go with the person that's leading the charge and their policies and they're turning what's turning out, not Bernie. Bernie's had 6 years or 4 years of MoveOn.org, Democracy for America, running campaigns and firing him up and building up his organizing or his Our Revolution. Our Revolution attacks black people and brown people. You can go look at those articles. So let's not say Bernie's doing everything perfect. What I will say,
I never said Sanders. Wait. I've never said Sanders did anything perfect. In fact, I'd be the first one to tell you that Sanders can make mistakes. He's flawed in the way that I think he's made mistakes in the way that he's run this campaign. So let's avoid the straw man in regards to what I am trying to say about this particular election. I'm asking something very basic. How does Joe Biden win the race if he's not going to be able to motivate the youth demographic to go out and vote for him? That's just a straightforward question.
And the thing I'm saying, Bernie has already shown that even when you focus on all that, it doesn't win. One, so why would we prioritize that? Why are we not prioritizing black and brown people? Straight across the board. Joe Biden did, across the board, not based on because they're younger and they happen to believe that free college for everybody is the better way to go. But if you look, he is winning black people of all ages, maybe not in the herds, but Bernie's only focusing on 18 to 29-year-olds. So, yeah, I suppose that's right. Let me ask you this. Why do the 18 and 29-year-olds feel that the rest of us don't matter?
Are you serious? You believe that 18 to 29-year-olds believe that everybody else outside of 18 to 29 doesn't matter? Why do you believe that 18 to 29-year-olds believe that nobody else matters?
Because our votes have said what we want, and now you're saying, well, we lost, but we want it this way anyways. Our vote.
Well, yeah.
Want.
But that's called political positions. I mean, people have their ideological beliefs in regards to the things that they want to see accomplished. That's just politics.
I get that. But to not vote because of it, or say you're not going to vote in November because of it, come on, man.
Well, look, again, people vote for who they want for all sorts of ideological reasons. It blows me away that anybody went and made a vote for Joe Biden. It blows me away that anybody went out and made a vote for Elizabeth Warren. But they do. And at no point did I ever attack his supporters or her supporters for making that vote. They choose. They make a choice on what they want to vote for and who they want to vote and whether or not a party is representing their interests. And if the party is not representing their interests, then the party shouldn't get their vote. It's that basic.
Here's the thing. I think people were clear that Bernie didn't represent their values. That's why they didn't vote for him twice now.
Well, I mean, if you're going to look at values, I mean, you can look at polling on the whole issue of values. Again, this election wasn't based on what do you believe or want in policy. This election was more based on who do you think is the person to beat Trump. And in place after place after place, that ended up going towards Biden. That's not a values issue. That's an issue of we're terrified and we need somebody to keep the monsters at bay.
But it's values. For those of us who live in states where people are on fear on the borderline, that is a big deal. For those of us who lived under tyranny of Joe Arpaio, who was raiding, who was going in and arresting people at home, who was going in and doing raids, those of us, that is our values. That's what I don't think you're getting here in Maricopa County. That this is not for us, this is not nothing new. We've been living like this for 20 years under Joe Arpaio. Joe Arpaio had the same group that Donald Trump did. Chris Kovash, SB 1070. All those things were done here. So I would disagree with you and say maybe your values don't reflect that. But mine do, and the
I guess
county do.
Yeah. No, I hear you. And in each of the states, I mean, this country is a wildly diverse, nuanced country with different values across the board. But Alejandro, to go back to my earlier question, apart from young people, and I guess I am probably closest to that age of that 18 to 29-year-old demographic of us on the call, I think it's just a generational shift. And a lot of people my age who are strapped with student debt and are not given proper civics education. And we live in a very celebritized culture where we can get more people to vote on American Idol than in the political system. I think there's been a lot of undereducation of young voters. There's been a lot of lack of outreach by older people in institutions who have wealth to the grassroots to inspire and move people, at least here in my own city of Washington, D.C., completely run by Democrats. Those in power, the big developers, the big corporations, those with huge government contracts, along with then the politicians that represent them, they do very, very little outreach to young people, and they show them very little understanding of why they should participate in the political process. And so I don't think that people are just going to come to the political process and vote or not vote. And so I think a lot of it to blame on young people, and I don't think that's necessarily what you're doing, but for young people not to participate in the electoral process, why would they when they're either not being informed to, they're not given any power once they actually do show up, and they don't necessarily have resources in a hyper finance capitalistic game of politics that we play in the United States? Why would they even give money when their money doesn't compare to anybody else's who has hundreds of thousands of dollars in their bank account? But Alejandro, I wanted to get back to the question about Latino voters. Joe Biden at rallies, at his own events, at debates have constantly had people protesting him. And the most famous exchange was when somebody at one of the events basically just asked him about his immigration policy, the 3 million deportations, and what he'll do for the over 10 million people that are living in this country that are undocumented right now. And Joe Biden simply said, then go vote for Trump. Go vote for Trump. I don't know. And he turns his back and walks away from the guy. And so right now, if Joe Biden is trying to pivot and he's trying to speak to young voters and he's trying to speak to Latino voters concerned about immigration, and his previous message was go vote for the other guy, I'm still a little concerned about what Joe Biden's going to be able to do to pull those people into the electoral process. I'm not really quite sure of that path. I wonder if you have a better view on it than I do.
Yeah, a couple of things. One is I actually don't think we have the luxury of sitting it out. I'm not a white person. I don't have the luxury of sitting out elections. I don't have the privilege of saying I'm not going to vote this election. Now, I grew up in the movement. My grandfather was Cesar Chavez. I grew up canvassing and working grassroots, working to the core. Absolutely. And my Tata always did this. Every election we worked together after election. And when it came time to it was about who could do the most to help farm workers. That's what it came down to. Now, right now, you're asking about deportations. I agree. They shouldn't have done it. The Obama administration fucked up. Oh, sorry about that. Messed up. They should not have been doing that. 100%. I also think that we're at a place now where, one, no Latino community have ever heard or seen Bernie Sanders before 2015. Not once. No elected officials, nobody. So even though we had that problem with Biden, we had seen him in our community before. Why are people protesting him? Because people are pissed. I get it. Why aren't people don't protest Bernie? Well, there's a couple of reasons, but I don't want to get into that right now. But you've seen that Bernie gets protested and how he acted before. So, I mean, look, people are unhappy and they have the right to protest, 100%. His response, that's not how I talk, but that's how he talks. So I don't think it was fair. I also don't think that one exchange is going to determine whether we let Donald Trump run terror or not. This is not about, I think this is where we're seeing the difference here. You're talking 18 to 29-year-olds. I get that. Well, guess what? For those people who are outside that range, who got 2 kids, got a house, not that they're mortgaging, that they're renting, and they're nowhere looking to buy. They don't live with their parents. They don't have roommates. They have these things that they have to take care of. You start looking at how to take care of it, not just about what you want and what you feel is great. And maybe that sounds like, hey, Alejandro, this will be a little asinine. But I do think when you're looking at Trump, those realities set in more than they have ever before. And to look,
Alejandro, yeah, I completely hear you on those and that urgency and the importance of voting. It's just a matter of, again, I mean, who knows on the edge of coronavirus right now of Joe Biden on the campaign trail. Obviously, that one testy exchange was not the solo testy exchange he had. He also had that with an auto worker there. He's also poked and jabbed at my friend there in Iowa, another person who initially came up asking him just simply about his relationship with coal plants. It's people that are going to make you feel like they're going to represent you. And Joe Biden, again, just not a great campaigner. And I think he got thrusted forward by the Democratic establishment as their best chance to stop Sanders. It's going to have to, I and others are going to have to see a little bit more from him before they come around. It is March. We have until November. We have an economy that's tanking right now. And like you said, I think that anti-Hillary vote was really strong that let a lot of people stay home. If people remember there in Michigan, Hillary Clinton lost by a mere 11,000 votes. But if you look at 4 of the largest counties there in and around Detroit, about 127,000 people that had voted for Obama simply didn't turn out for Hillary Clinton. It'll be interesting, too, as I mentioned, Barack Obama, how he comes back onto the campaign trail. Alejandro, I want to ask you a little bit more about marijuana. If you have a few minutes to stay with us, I want to sneak in a couple callers who have some thoughts on what we've been saying here, talking about the results from Arizona. I think we have a couple callers here on the line. I believe Andrew is on. Andrew, are you here with us?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, thank you for calling in. What's on your mind today?
So I wanted to discuss about this whole thing. I think the general American approach at this point to elections altogether is becoming quite naive. Whether it be people like Jamal or whether it be people like pretty much everybody you had on your show today. So this idea that Bernie Sanders was going to be able to do anything different this time around is absolutely naive to begin with. The Democratic Party is completely organized and rigging and putting results to their benefit. It's just naive to think that whether it's Bernie or whether it's anybody else, there is going to be a chance that the Democratic Party is just going to crown Bernie the king of the party. And on top of that, the second layer of mistake is to believe in Bernie again. He has showed again and again that he doesn't have the spine. You can have the best message on the planet if you don't have a good messenger. As long as you're living in In a democracy that is supposed to be representative, you need representatives that also have character. And he has showed the lack of it on and on again. In the end, he's debating with a guy who has dementia. I mean, he might not be officially diagnosed, but I don't think it takes much to notice it. So that comes back to on Bernie. The fault is on Bernie that he simply has certain ideas or certain principles, let's say, of debate that he prefers over the fact that so-called revolution, existential problems, end of the planet, people dying, poverty, bankruptcy, and so on. Which is more important in the end? If you're supposed to represent a public that is suffering, you need to bring the suffering on the table when you're having a discussion, not your friendship with someone. The other problem, this idea...
Finish your thought here. We got about 10 seconds left.
Yeah, people don't seem to be able to play politics. If you want to burn the Democratic Party down, you vote for Trump, you make him win every 50 states, and you go to the Democratic Party and ask them how did voting for Biden work? You cannot keep voting for Biden or the next worst case scenario, hoping that the next president from the Republicans isn't going to be any worse than Trump. It's going to get worse than Trump. Every single president that's come from or candidate even, that's come from the Republicans has been worse and worse. And as much as we think that Trump is the worst case scenario, the next one will be worse.
Thank you, Andrew, so much for your call. We have another caller on the line. I believe Al is on the line. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik Live in Washington, D.C. We're joined by Alejandro Chavez, the political director for Smart and Safe Arizona. Thank you for continuing to join us, Alejandro. Let's get some comments from Al before I do want to pivot back, Alejandro, and ask you briefly about the efforts to legalize marijuana there in the state of Arizona. But first, we take our call from Al. Al, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, the strategy of voting blue, no matter who, is what gave us Trump. We have seen the rightward slide of electoral politics for the past half century. And the left and the progressives for that period have been using the strategy of voting blue no matter who. And just like that Lawrence O'Donnell video, if you pledge your vote to the Democratic Party, they have no reason to care about you at all. And they're just going to go after the moderates, the people to the right who aren't just going to vote for the Democratic Party. So, like
Al, thank you. Yep, go ahead.
Yep.
No, Al, I think you make a great point. I'm sorry if I dropped you off there at the end. Give us a call back tomorrow. Tomorrow and the rest of the week, you can call us at 202-521-1320. We've debated a lot the blue no matter what over the last weeks, and we'll obviously continue to talk about that moving forward. But Alejandro, I did want to just, if we have a few minutes left with you here, I wanted to talk a little bit about an issue you're working on there in Arizona. That's the efforts to legalize marijuana. I believe it's a ballot initiative that you guys are looking to place in November for Arizona ballots. Exit polls yesterday showed those who strongly opposed legalizing marijuana overwhelmingly supported Joe Biden. Joe Biden has talked a lot about the nonsensical notion that marijuana is a gateway drug, and how I'm curious if Joe Biden, now that marijuana is legalized in roughly about a dozen states and it's medically allowed in over 30 states, I'm curious if you have Joe Biden on the top of the ticket, how that will hurt other progressive, or I don't even know if marijuana legalization is progressive. I don't want to use that word. Let me rephrase that. How will it hurt your marijuana efforts to legalize it if Joe Biden, somebody who opposes marijuana, is on the top of the ballot come November?
I think it's a great question. Look, I mean, most of the times, and in fact, I can only think of 2 times where a candidate has driven out election more than initiatives. Initiatives usually get more people to turn out in a statewide race, right? I mean, you start thinking, and when you think about people who are candidates that did it, you're talking like Robert Kennedy. I mean, John F. Kennedy. You're talking Obama, right? But other than that, usually no one gets the people across the board, across what we talk about, all demographics excited. The one thing about this initiative is that's what it does. You know, we've had marijuana, medical marijuana here for some years now, and the idea behind it being something that some people do is not real anymore. It's got a whole ecosystem of job opportunities, financial benefits, whether you're legalizing it or just even the jobs that allow people to take when you're talking about science, cultivating, retail, insurance. Just it's got a whole big ecosystem. So I don't think that Joe Biden does anything to it as much as I think that our initiative helps drive turnout across the board for all districts up and down the ballot because of the way it's set up.
What would you say though? I guess my question: what would you say to somebody though if they deeply cared about the marijuana industry? They were somebody that could start a small business. They were somebody that wanted to work in that industry. There's somebody that wants to use the hemp, the CBD oil. They want to use it for their grandparent with chronic diseases, or if they're you're a Iraq war veteran struggling with PTSD, and that person says marijuana legalization is so important to me. And then they say, well, who should I vote for president? And you say, oh, Joe Biden. And they go, well, what's Joe Biden's position? And you go, oh, he's against it. How are you then pitching to them, well, we got to vote blue no matter who in that instance? I guess that's where I'm confused a little bit on when it comes to the mismatch between the policies that Joe Biden doesn't support, and then you're basically telling 18 to 29-year-olds or anybody that doesn't support an ideology along with Biden to say, I know you're for it, but this guy isn't, but we got to vote for him. That just seems like a very hard sell to people that are feeling disenfranchised or feel marginalized by the system already, who's simply saying, look, Joe Biden, he has money, he has billionaire donors, he's been in office for all these years, he's well plugged in, he's against this issue you really care about. We'll hopefully get the issue over here, but how are you going to try to get somebody? I don't know what that looks like to convince somebody to vote against their interest, if you're being honest with them.
Yeah, no, totally. And that's nothing new for organizers. We do that all the time because the fact is you don't agree with anybody 100% of the time, right? And you don't agree with anybody's stance on everything 100% of the time. So no matter who you elect, whether it's city council, dog catcher, once you get them elected, you have to work to move them and hold them accountable. Even Bernie Sanders would have to be held accountable and moved on issues. And there's time between now and the election to move Biden and his team. It's not over. So there's plenty of time to move them and his team and get them seeing that this Bernie, even if he were to get elected, there'd be things that we'd have to move him on and things so forth. So and I'm not just saying on this one issue. I'm talking on issues across the board. So as organizers and grassroots community activists, no matter who you vote for, you know that there's policies they're not going to support, or even more so, there's policies that they're going to pass that you need to go and hold them accountable. And because you voted for them doesn't mean that's it, they get a free pass. Obama, look at all the people that voted for him, and then how many people were protesting him, calling him the porter-in-chief, even after he did DACA. So just because someone doesn't agree with you doesn't mean, oh, that's it, you walk away from the table. You get as much as you can done, and then you work to move forward on these other things. So I would say that's, that you might not feel it, but as somebody who grew up in a movement of where it was constantly told that the only people that you could support were people only thought we were being supported by other Latinos. Truth is, once these white women came from Oregon and these people started coming from Beverly Hills, and even though they didn't agree with us on everything, they just agreed that children shouldn't be in the fields or that farm workers should pay even wage. So I think that it's just part of organizing. That's how.
I hear you. I hear you, but I guess for me, it's just like who has to move the politicians and who has the power. And at least here again, from my perspective of Washington, D.C., where I spent the majority of my adult life organizing, it's always about the grassroots having to move the establishment, the well-funded, the wealthy, developer-connected politician towards a social issue that would help the poorest and the least amongst us. It's never been like the poorest, least amongst us person got elected to office and then they had to be moved by the lobbyists for the corporation. I think we are in a place where the elected officials always come from a corporate donor class that have to then be moved for the will of the people. I mean, to get basic warm meals to people in the time of the coronavirus, right now, we have to fight and move that. Why are there not politicians having to be pulled and fought the other way? And I think that's where a lot of Bernie Sanders people, it's not Sanders people, these people are longtime lefties, either they're former communists or they are communists or they're socialists. They've simply had to fight and fight and fight to get what they want. They've never just gotten what they wanted and watched the other side have to struggle it away within the Democratic Party. Obviously, the Republican Party and its opposition will struggle and pull against the Democrat, but in the leadership of the Democratic Party, and I think this is where people are like, I'm done with this. Even little things like, why is Tom Perez thrust into the DNC leadership at the last moment when Keith Ellison has the thing wrapped up? In situations like that, time and time again, you're always asking the left of the party to have to hold their nose and then fight to get their issues heard, as opposed to saying to the right wing of the party, you know what, we're going to put in the lefty leader that you don't agree with and you guys fight. And I think people are sick of having to be the ones that always have to fight. I know that's the system. I know that's capitalist America, and that's the struggle. But at the same time, a lot of these people have said, I'm done fighting. We've tried it long enough. We'll turn to ourselves, our social movements, our economic movements. But the political system in America is so broken. Why would we come back? Alejandro, I do really appreciate your time. If you want the last word there, I'll give you about 15 seconds before we have to switch to our next break and get to the UFOs.
Oh, thank you all so much. And I want to give a huge shout out to Adrian Fontes, our Maricopa County Recorder, who ran a great program. The County Board of Supervisors will try and take credit, even though they stripped it from him, and our Constitution says he should. So thank you all. I appreciate our conversation. And hey, like anybody, brothers argue, so I appreciate the conversation, guys.
That was a great conversation. We have a lot more to debate with you in the future. That's Alejandro Chavez. He's the political director for Smart and Safe Arizona. Check out that ballot initiative. Please vote in favor of legalizing marijuana come November in the state of Arizona. You're listening to Political Misfits. Bob Schleber, Jamarl Thomas here with you. We're live in Washington, D.C. on Radio Sputnik, and we'll be back after this.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No, it's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Welcome back to Radio Sputnik, or Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm here with the curious yet skeptical Bob Schleber. You hear that sound? It's Wednesday. Let's talk about things that are out of this world. Literally. So, Tom DeLonge, you guys have heard me mention Tom DeLonge and TTSA to the Stars Academy. And the U.S. military has a contract with TTS Academy. This was another story that I did. And the catch becomes, what is that contract about? TTSA is specific to looking for alien life, putting out technologies that it gets from UFOs, even putting through research from, again, UFOs. They're very clear in what the point of that organization is, even going so far as to try to build like a spaceship or something. So an organization that is specific to dealing with UFOs and research for UFOs and disclosing that information to the public, that organization is now working with the U.S. military. So the operative question immediately becomes, oh my God, what is the U.S. military doing with this organization that is looking for UFOs? Well, interestingly enough, when a FOIA request was put out, the U.S. military said, yeah, kick rocks. So this is out of Vice News, of all places, and I'll just read parts of it. The U.S. military, or the U.S. Army, refused to release any records about its deal with Tom DeLonge's UFO hunting group to the Stars Academy. In October 2019, the former Blink-182 frontman UFO organization joined forces with the U.S. Army's Combat Capabilities Development Command, a research and development body. According to the contract, the government is interested in studying some pretty exotic sciences such as camouflage, inertial mass reduction, and quantum communication. In particular, the government is interested in a group's Atom Project, which Doug Helias, a spokesperson for the U.S. Army Combat Capabilities Development Command Ground Vehicle Systems Center, describes as a global dragnet for the collection and evaluation of novel materials. He's talking about materials extruded from UFOs or going around the world trying to get UFO materials. That's what he's talking about. That's what the US military is working with. In 2018, TTSA put out a call for individuals and organizations to submit material from alleged exotic sources as part of the project. Again, we're talking about aliens. Knowing this, Greenwald filed a FOIA request regarding for a copy of all records and emails related to Dr. Joseph Cannon of the U.S. Army Future Command, who was working on the agreement containing keywords such as TTSA and To the Stars. The Army got back with Greenwald, telling him that there are 29 documents found related to his requests, and each page was exempt from his requests. The Army stated that it was not going to release any records. Motherboard, this is Vice, reached out to Haliax, the Army's CCDC spokesperson, who said that any documents related to DeLong's organization will be classified as trade secret and commercial or financial information that are privileged and confidential. Now, let's put this in perspective for the moment. A group that is specific to finding information about UFOs and getting materials all across the world that were supposedly either extruded from UFOs or at the very least studying UFOs themselves. This organization with that explicit interest is working with our military, the United States military. That military is working with the organization when people scratch their head thinking to themselves, well, the Army is a legit organization. Doesn't it add a certain degree of legitimacy to whatever To the Stars Academy is doing? Since the military, who I would think wouldn't necessarily be mulling around with these guys if there wasn't a there to it, meaning it adds a certain amount of legitimacy to the process that Army is willing to work with To the Stars Academy in this kind of weird exotic physics and this attention to trying to find materials. So the question becomes this: what on earth are they doing, and why can't they disclose it? And the fact that they can't disclose raises almost more questions than if they could. Bob, this is rather wild. And I like to put it in the context of you have one of our major wings of the military in this country working with an organization that has explicit interest in getting information about UFOs. This is kind of wild, right? I mean, you know, for people who are skeptical, for people who think, okay, I don't believe that there's a there to it, then this is another bit of evidence that gets across that the Army most likely would not be working with this organization if this organization was full of it. It adds credibility to TTSA's agenda. So, Bob, what do you think about it?
Or Jamaro, or it's just a smokescreen, and they're doing something else. You know?
Well, look, to be fair, you know, my argument is it's either us or it's not. That's always been my argument. Yeah. And I think both of those positions are pretty phenomenal. In this very specific case, though, when this story first came out and TTSA was working with the military, I was like, wow, that's pretty phenomenal. I mean, this wasn't something they were trying to hide or anything else. The Army was legitimately working with these guys. The UFO tapes came from the Pentagon. So again, we have another situation where, you know, this aspect of defense and intelligence is working with these guys in order to either release information or to put this information out for the public for whatever particular reason. Yeah. I guess to me, it's the legitimacy factor. Like the people who question UFOs and everything else, I think at this point, it goes beyond question. And I think it goes to this notion of, does this not add a certain degree of legitimacy to the organization now that the Army is working with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think on their end, for sure, that's on their website and their business card. We get paid a lot of money by the government.
Right.
I mean, like, yes, that absolutely adds a lot of credibility. And when you're trying to reach out to others for more financial support, the U.S. Army name is going to go a long way. I was laughing that the chief content officer of To the Stars is Carrie DeLong, Tom DeLong's sister. Just to add, it's a family affair over there To the Stars, and they're going to basically have all of the information. It might be easier to do non-disclosures when you just have like one family internally signing it to work with, that it doesn't spread between the other employees. Jamar, how big is To the Stars at this point? I mean, is it just Tom DeLong and he's hired a bunch of people, or it's like pretty big right now where they could actually have a full scalable operation?
So it's not huge. When
What's
Tom
like not huge? Like 10 not huge, or like 100 not huge?
Oh, you mean the number of people? So I'm not entirely sure of the number of people that work there. I do know when they first formed the organization, they had a lot of scientists and physicists, people who were in exotic physics that were somewhat of the brainchild of it. So it's like the people who you saw at the top, there were maybe like 4 or 5 people. There were big names regarding science or former spooks and those type of things.
So then
But
tell me, Jamar, I'm curious then, Jamar, as people listen here, Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. on Radio Sputnik, tell me then, just work through some of the theories then. So if it's not us, the government, so there's like, it's not us and the government doesn't tell us because they're not necessarily certain what it is. It's not us and the government doesn't tell us because they're not quite sure how they want to respond to it. Or it is us and the government just wants to play around with stuff. And why is it us and we're not being told about it, especially if it has to do with the development of certain physical I don't know. It just seems like if they have the technology, like right now, we're not able to properly get meals to people during the shutdown of our entire country, but yet they got some type of ship that able to defy the physics that I was taught in high school. Why are they not telling us? So
why don't they hide it? So
game through it. If it's not us, why don't we know? If it is us, why don't we know?
That's always a good question, right? I mean, there are a few ideas behind it. So one idea is it's not us. And because it's not us, so we're not entirely sure what's going on, meaning we don't necessarily fully understand the technology, nor do we entirely understand what it is. We just accept it as a somewhat of a phenomena. And as our technology has advanced, we started looking at it in more logical ways in the sense that, okay, these guys are probably beings, that type of stuff. Well, if you can't explain it to your population, should you tell your population? Meaning, if you can't explain to your population that there's no threat here, there's no issue here, how do you disclose something that you yourself have no control over and can't explain? And between those two things, it may be easier just to not say anything. You also have the secondary aspect of what it would mean for your society. So imagine for the moment that you find out your society, for the most part, lives off oil and gas, and you find that something is coming to this planet, and it's not getting here by oil and gas. Like, what does it mean for your religions? What does it mean for your society? What does it mean for even this issue of capitalism? Depending, like all of these things come into question the moment that you remove just humans from the mix. The moment that you add something else that's not us, and you have a secondary intelligence that is just as capable, if not more so than us, then everything that we have as systems in this country, in this world, become up for grabs. Like, I think the issue here is that you can't put the toothpaste back in the bottle. That ultimately you're stuck with this kind of, it's unknown how society will deal with this information. And if society doesn't deal with this information well, you're stuck with that. So I would imagine that they don't think they're going to get 2 chances. You got to get it right once. And so it ends up being a 2-step where you release a little bit of information, but you always have the ability to pull the information back and say, okay, we didn't put it out. Even with us. When the Pentagon first put this out, the Pentagon acted as if the Pentagon didn't know where the tapes came from. You found out later that they did indeed come from the Pentagon. This 2-step process seems to be something that has been taking place for a while. And the last thing, if it's a threat, meaning if it's a situation where we think that there's the potential for a threat. Now, we know Tom DeLonge believes in the bad alien theory. And that in and of itself makes me somewhat distrustful of Tom DeLonge, not to mention the number of spooks that he has around him. I don't trust our political actors now. I certainly don't trust them when this is in the context of something that I can't get my head around because we don't necessarily know, like it's in the dark. So if there's any potential at all for a threat in the situation, or it could just be top secret from the standpoint of the president running it, meaning it's very possible that the secrecy that's being expressed is run through executive order. Like there's so many things that could be the reasons and rationales. It's hard to necessarily put your finger on one issue. It's just unknown at this point.
Yeah, I'm just laughing at how America has handled the national emergency we're in right now, to think that if we can't handle this, how are we going to handle aliens or unidentified flying objects and their pilots? But even the sense that, like, what wouldn't we freak out about or actually support if they came and said, we want to help you fix your economy, we'll redistribute the wealth from the wealthiest greedy people who have dozens of homes to those who don't have it, and make sure that student debt's forgiven, you have health care, and that the climate doesn't destroy and kill all of you, I think Americans right now would be like, no, we're good, pass. So I'm not sure what they could offer that wouldn't freak people out. Jamar, let's turn to one more quick break here on Political Misfits. We got some updates around the coronavirus and people slowly going bored, demanding more from the movie Cats. Had we not asked enough from them, Jamar, we're on Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. on Radio Sputnik. We'll be back after this.
We call Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan the most disruptive radio show in America.
It's a great show, and we have a lot of fun.
We come to you live from Washington, D.C. every Monday through Friday morning.
What I like best is that we bring in experts from all over the world.
From Barcelona, from Egypt, from Seoul, South Korea,
from Newark, New Jersey. We try to bring people great guests, great calls from our listeners, and, of course, stupid jokes. And we do it with two hosts that have very different viewpoints. Now, here's the thing, Garland. A lot of people would think you and I would just argue. I mean, I'm a Republican Trump supporter.
And, of course, I am a progressive Democrat Bernie Sanders supporter.
The surprising thing is how much we actually agree on.
And you won't be surprised because you're going to find out just how much you agree and just how much you enjoy this show.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlageber here with Jamarl Thomas. I do want to just give a shout out to my family in Utah. 5.7 meter, 5.7, what are they even measured by? Magnitude there, 5.7 magnitude hit Utah. Jamarl, it's been interesting here the last few days. My thoughts are extensively thinking about climate change. That will continue to affect Americans regardless of whether or not we're not moving around quickly. So if we see an earthquake, a tsunami, thank goodness. I know I was listening to a show yesterday and they were saying, too bad this shutdown didn't happen in the winter when it was cold and everybody's just kind of at home already. Right now it's so nice out, it makes it hard to stay at home. Thank God it's not snowing out or cold out right now. It's hard to provide the essential services, emergency services, medicine, and other supplies people need in general. I could not imagine trying to do that in freezing temperatures or with the roads shut down. It would just be even more chaotic. And so we've had really, at least here in Washington, D.C. and seemingly across the country there outside of Utah, good weather to be able to fare with the situation we're facing. Jamarl, I did want to slide in here, as I mentioned, our thankful and amazing producer, Michelle Whitty, keeping us laughing here and keeping the humor as we all slowly go stir crazy inside our own homes. The
Absolutely.
hashtag, Jamarl, it's hashtag release the butthole cut is now trending. And we're talking about the movie Cats, if people had seen it. Apparently there's a version where if you've seen it on Broadway and you're dying from the movie, where basically there are other versions of it. I haven't seen the original, so I'm a little lost on the different versions, but people are demanding that we have this cut of the movie Cats with their butts.
And it's called Butthole Cuts of Cats?
Butthole Cut. Release the butthole cut. That's what people are looking for. They binge through too much of their normal programming. They're looking for something else. As you remember, Cats first came out, Jamarl, they could still see some of the actors' hands. They could, so yeah, it was like a mess of a CGI, and in the one version, no butts. And so yeah, you see what happens when a studio has to meet that deadline to get that movie out, and they were not prepared to do so. I'm curious what society comes up with in this moment over the next week. We saw there in Italy where people were actually out on their balconies singing a folk song. I would be curious to think of what people are working. I wanted to start banging a pot and pan outside of my home. We're not on complete lockdown and people are actually still walking around. And so I think I would just annoy people if I started banging a pot and pan to try to start some musical jam.
Yeah, I think they throw rocks at you. I would suggest that people get their groceries. I would suggest that they go buy their pot, because at some point all of these things are going to be shut down. to get, and the Amazon stuff. Like Amazon has been forcing these people to work longer hours because of dealing with the number of people who are calling for orders. Because, the moment that people stop going to the stores and everything else, well, they said, well, I could just call Amazon, in which case they'll deliver that stuff. So I would suggest that people bunker down or hunker down, because you may be in for a while. This might just be getting worse before it gets better.
Yeah, Donald Trump has now ordered the suspension of all evictions and foreclosures as several congressional members, both in the Senate and House, try to compete over different bills that will try to send emergency relief to people. Jamal, I think the thing that frustrates me more than anything is it shows that these things can be done. It's just a matter of political will. Can we stop evictions? Yes. Can we redistribute wealth from the government to the people? Yes. I'm not sure. I'm just riding around here yesterday out on my bike. I live in a community with a lot of poverty on the streets. You have a lot of people that just don't have bank accounts. A lot of people that are homeless or housing insecure, that either sleep in the streets, they sleep in shelters, they sleep on friends' couches or floors. How are you getting them a check? How are we going to get them wealth? I know obviously this will be on the hands of municipalities to do this, but it seems like the system and structure is so broken. I mean, even in another situation, we're going to see more fault lines of capitalism. I think it was in Italy that they were able to, there was a part of a ventilator that the patent company that had the patent on it, Jamal, would charge like $11,000 for this one part of the equipment. And these people were able to 3D print it for the cost of $1. And now that patent company is suing these volunteers who were able to 3D print this piece of goods. If you empower people, we don't need corporations charging endless amounts. That's what corporations say, oh, you can't do it without us. No, people can do it without you. Stop saying that. People need to see past that and see these things that they want, like we've been talking about, are possible. Oh, I want what Sanders is offering, but we can't have that. Well, Donald Trump in a state of emergency is offering that to you. Don't tell me Bernie Sanders in a Democratic-led movement couldn't offer anything better than Donald Trump serving up today.
That's right. I mean, and they're even talking about UBIs now. I mean, you had Mitt Romney, Republican Mitt Romney, Tom Cotton, and Donald Trump have been mentioning like $1,000 a month for UBI. Muchin came out, Muchin, I think I might be pronouncing that slightly wrong, but he comes out and says the president wants to ensure that people have money within 2 weeks, and so they're going to be sending checks. Now, to your point, Bob, how do you get that money to people if they don't have bank accounts? And that's where it gets interesting in regards to how they're going to make that work. But it seems that what I've wanted and what I've been advocating for, either UBI, the rent suspension, the eviction suspension, it seems that they're getting in gear. And I got to be honest, if Trump does this, Trump wins the next election. I just don't see how it goes after that.
Yeah, or it's just argued that he could have avoided all of this and that none of this was necessary in the first place. Yeah, it'll be fascinating to watch how this spins out. And I was really interested by that $2,000 mark that Trump had offered. That makes me feel that this is going to be something that lasts more than a few weeks. I think we're going to slowly, if we are able to basically try to withhold the spread of the virus, that you're going to have to slowly ramp society back up into full speed. I don't think we just snap our fingers and say, yep, everyone back to work today. Yeah. That seems too risky. I feel like we're going to be in this for a while. And again, even if we were able to snap out of it tomorrow, it doesn't restart the engine of the economy. A lot of people have to be rehired that were laid off. There's going to be all sorts of paperwork. And sure, you skip your eviction notice this month, you're still having to deal with it the next month and the next month and the next month. I also just want to say with our last minute here, if you're out and about, keep an eye on those who are vulnerable that may need help. There's lots of mutual aid people in your community. You just need to connect and find with them, find institutions, find churches. Also keep a close eye on police. There's not much going on in the streets right now, except a lot of groups still are convening. A lot of people don't want to leave. These are a lot of vulnerable Black populations that are preyed upon by the police. So we need extra eyes of the people on the street right now. And it'll be interesting to see if we ever issue a stay-in-place order, what that will look like. A lot of people are not willing to stay in place. They're still going out. One place in Chicago was actually having to, the police had to lock their doors because they refused to stay shut. So it'll be interesting to see how that continues to play out. Well, we're out of time here on Political Misfits, a great show, and I really appreciate our engineers for making everything run. Big thanks to Alejandro Chavez, Donna Davis for joining us today, and all those folks who had called in. For Bob Schlaber and Jamal Thomas, thank you for listening. Now get back to organizing.